Idolatry is a hot button topic in the Bible. It is an often talked about sin. And I think we get to a point today where we just think, we don't have to worry about idols anymore. We read in the New Testament, especially with the letters to Asia, with those 7 churches, that many of them existed in a time period where temples were built for idolatrous gods. And we think about Pergamos that had the temple of Zeus, and you have, Diana, goddess of the Ephesians, and all of those kinds of people that were worshiping these idol gods. And we get to today, and we don't really have, the temple of Zeus in Memphis, Tennessee. We don't really have, the things that go like that to the same way. And so it can be easy to just kind of think, idolatry is dead. But modern idols still exist and are alive and well. But someone might be thinking, what in the world is that? You're going to have to explain it a little bit more. Yeah. So, Wayne, what would you do if someone asks, what makes something a modern idol?
Yeah, let's kind of set the stage here a little bit. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul makes a statement, I think beginning about verse 4. He says, therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols. And so in the first century, obviously, they're dealing with that. He says, we know that an idol is nothing in the world. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking about, and that there is no other God but one. He makes that point, even though, in his point, continuing on, if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods, many lords, in other words, because people have made such, they have made these idols and so forth. He's in a city, or he's writing to a church in a city that has, numerous temples all around it and so forth. And he says, even though we know that ultimately an idol is nothing in the world, we see them everywhere. And we know that they're nothing, and yet they're all over the place. Yet for us there is one God, Father, of whom are all things, and we of him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we live. So to kind of set the stage, yes, there are idols. There were idols then. There were literally idol temples everywhere at that point in time. We say, okay, well, 21st century, we don't see those temples. We see the ruins of those temples. Yeah. And say, there can't be any more idols, right? All those are tore down. But I think about what still happens even today is really similar to Manasseh in 2 Chronicles 33. And so I'm just going to kind of read just a little bit of that. Of course, we know that he did evil in the sight of the Lord. This is chapter 33, verse 2. He did evil in the sight of the Lord according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. What did he do? He rebuilt the high places which Hezekiah had broken down or tore down. He raised up altars for the Baals, and he made wooden images, more idols, right? And he worshipped all the host of heaven, lowercase, and served them. He also built altars where? In the house of the Lord. Mm-hmm. He introduced these things into the house of the Lord. And so he brought them all over and in Jerusalem, where obviously the Lord had said, in Jerusalem shall be my name forever. And so these were in contrast to and contrary to the Lord of heaven. And then he goes so far, he made his sons pass through the fire, the valley of the son of Hinnom. And he practiced soothsaying, witchcraft, sorcery, and consulted mediums and spirits and so forth. Well, that actually sounds like something that might actually be in our world today, right? If you're driving along the interstate, you see billboard signs all over. Hey, come get your palm read. All kind of things that are out there like that. Okay, but he did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoked God to anger. What did he do? He set a carved image, the idol which he made in the house of God. So, even today, the Lord's people have to deal with idols in the world. God had said, thou shalt have no other gods before me. That was part of the old law, part of the Ten Commandments specifically, Exodus 20, verse 3. And so even today, God's people, just as people in the past, if we place anything, anyone, carved, imaginary, or even real, in place of God, it would be considered an idol.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we ask, well, what makes an idol? Something then placed in the place of God.
That's right.
That's an idol. And so to turn around and say, well, is that really something we have?
Well, and that's the exact definition for an idol, is an image or representation of a god used as an object of worship.
Right.
There's a secondary definition, though, that says a person or thing that is greatly admired, loved, or revered. For example, some might say in our current day and age of the NFL, man, Patrick Mahomes is my role model and my idol.
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift is my idol.
Yeah.
People have those terms that they
Right.
utilize. And I don't think we realize just how deeply rooted in sin that term is, because it's become so, American Idol.
I was going to say it.
We have these things that they are based around. This is the one we all look up to. And certainly there's nothing wrong with enjoying a friendly competition of a singing show or a good football game or a good concert that's clean and enjoyable to go and experience. All of those things are fine. But when we think about the modern idolatry that we have, it goes even deeper than this. My computer can do a lot of things. And we have an instructor here at the school that you and I got to sit at the feet of that would always say, you can't baptize your computers, and you got to stop treating them like they are the only thing that's the most important thing in your life, and get out into the brotherhood, and get out into the community and be with the people. And all of that is right to an extent. Obviously, my sermons have to be written.
Yeah.
I need to write them on something, and I'm not good enough with a pen to handwrite my sermons.
Same.
I'm thankful for the technology that exists. But this computer can tell me the answer to a lot of questions, too, with a good internet connection and a Google search or a DuckDuckGo search, as the case might be, that has the ability to do that with the push of a button, with the keystroke, and hit the enter button, and you are right there. You can see anything. And so this is a knowledgeable device. It is a device that can benefit me and provide for me even. If I need to buy something off Amazon, I can go and buy that on this device. I can do all of these types of groceries now. My wife and I were talking about it the other day. Growing up, we used to have to go with our parents to the grocery store, and that was, I feel so bad for my mom now knowing that this technology exists today where she doesn't have to go to the grocery store anymore if she doesn't want to. And yet she had to take 3 kids to the grocery store.
Right.
And deal with all of that while trying to also shop. You can do all that from the computer too, or the phone, the iPad, your Apple TVs and your television sets and all that. All of these things do provide certain values, they do provide certain things, and they can certainly be an idol.
Yeah.
I remember years ago, I heard someone say, have you ever noticed that when you get a notification, your initial instinct is to immediately check what it is?
Yeah.
And there's even people that talk about phantom vibration that your phone will give off, that you think you've got a notification that came in. You're like, oh, my phone just vibrated. I must have gotten a text message. And you immediately reach for it. I'm really bad with my watch.
Yeah.
I'll feel that vibration, and the initial instinct is to just say, hey, let me check and see what we got here. Well, that's an idol if we're not careful. So here's what I want to ask you. What would you do if someone discredits everything that I just said and says, no, none of that's idolatrous, none of that can turn into that? What would you do if someone says, there are no modern idols?
Well, people try to justify what they want to do, clearly. The very premise of the show American Idol is basically, if you sing well enough, we are going to make you an idol.
We will idolize you.
We will idolize you. And it's foolish to say, well, that's not the same. Well, it is. It's still the idea of putting something in first place.
Yep.
And God reserves that place always. And so you mentioned sports. You could say hunting, fishing, vacations, because sometimes people take vacations and they take vacations from God and worship services and things like that. So a vacation could be literally, become an idol for somebody. So we're gonna leave it all behind, for a week. Well, they leave God behind. And so you could say, okay, well, that's unfaithfulness. Well, idolatry is unfaithfulness.
That's right.
Sometimes, and I would say probably, especially in the last couple of years, you could even say the comfort of one's home could be an idol, because they're failing to worship properly when they could be with the saints. That could certainly be problematic, could be considered idolatry. There are numerous things, and we'll get into it in another question here in just a moment. Money, power, trying to be, just again, trying to put yourself first. The idea of fame, obviously. Illicit sexual activity. Yeah. We've had other episodes where we've talked about pornography and adultery and things like that. But illicit sexual activity has always been associated with idolatry, by the way. And so those things could be taking the place of God in that way. One's own appearance, knowledge itself, and that kind of, to me, we can talk about Gnosticism just a little bit, sure, because that would certainly go into that realm as well. But
well, Daniel 3 certainly deals with idol.
Sure.
An obvious idol that is standing right there, yeah, right in front of them. Yeah. It's easy for them to point at it and go, that's wrong. Daniel 6, there is no idol that is built and constructed, but there's still an idol in Daniel chapter 6. And yet it looks different than what we're used to. In Daniel 6, as we all know the story very well, the governors and satraps, as the New King James puts it, they come to King Darius. I don't say Darius, but some might. That's okay. You can be wrong. That's fine. Darius is how I say it because it's how I always thought it was said. But they go to the king and they say, hey, king, you're incredible. You're this amazing guy. Yeah. And we just want to hype you up for a little bit here and give you a month of being the guy that everyone prays to. Just you. If anybody prays to anybody but you, let's kill them. I mean, when I think about that premise, the arrogance that the king there must have had about himself. I am so great that if they do pray to someone else, we should kill them. How dare they do that? Yeah. And if here's the sad premise, too, as we think about this, if King Darius is so great that he deserves 30 days, why not all of the days?
Right.
Why doesn't he get it year-round? Why isn't it already happening? Right. If Nebuchadnezzar was as great as he had professed himself to be when he was cast out of the kingdom and told to go act like a beast of the field for a set amount of time, why wasn't it already the case that Babylon was the world power that they were before God got involved? You see, it's interesting how even the modern idols of their day and age still needed to understand their lack of importance in the grand scheme of things. With Nebuchadnezzar, God says, hey, buddy, you are not the reason that this happened. If you take me out of the equation, Nebuchadnezzar, you're a nobody. No one even knows who you are. And I often think about that it's amazing that some of the names that we know, we only know because God took the time to write about them. Yeah. Now, we would have heard about Nebuchadnezzar through some history and some writings of ancient, antiquity, if you will, and people have talked about these, rulers and leaders. But would we know what we know? We wouldn't. When then you look at Darius, and Darius is the type of person that says, I should be prayed to. Where's the idol in that? Well, it's not something that was built that they said, pray to this, and that it will be to the king. No, they want them to be praying to the king. That is not the type of idolatry that we're used to seeing in the Old Testament, let alone the New Testament even. You get to the New Testament day and age now that we live under this law, and we see God almost as if he said in Daniel chapter 6, let me prepare you for this.
Right.
Let me showcase an example, because I think it's easy for us to look at chapter 3 and say, well, that's wrong. We can't do that. And we get to chapter 6 and it's, hadn't seen that before in the same way. And not to say that it never happened. It's escaping me if there's another example of this that I'm just not thinking of. But I love the fact that God says, idolatry is not limited to man-made things. Idolatry can also be put upon the very things that I created.
Sure.
And we talk about in the Old Testament, you put an idol on its head, it can't turn itself upright. They're dumb, they say nothing, they know nothing, they speak nothing, they hear nothing, all of these things. And yet people use God's elements that he's made and put on the earth to create idols. And yet there have been times, like Daniel 6, where God's own creation that was made in his image has then been taken and become an idol. And as you said just a few moments ago, the idea of American Idol, we will idolize you.
Right.
You will be the one. And people often think, in a culture today, too, that is saturated through social media and becoming, at this time, Instagram and TikTok famous and all of that kind of trash. Because that's ultimately what it is if we don't have our minds on straight and our minds fixed upon Christ. It's not to say that there's no one out there that can become quite followed, if you will, and still be a Christian. But too often I see people compromising on their Christianity for a following on TikTok or Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. All of those things happen. The music industry can get a hold of us if we're not careful. Sports, if we're not careful, could get a hold of us. There's so many things that can pull out the Christianity that is within me. And when that happens, that has become my idol. And it is not an idol like we would read about in the Old Testament in the same fashion,
Right.
but it still exists.
Yeah. And I would add to that thought, there's a place where this all seems to come from, and that is the idea of what we desire,
Right?
Our desires, and I think we talk more probably in the next question about it. But
Well, when you think about that final question, someone says maybe after listening to this, or they do some self-reflection and they think about some of the things we've even presented today, okay, I get it. I've got a problem.
yeah,
This is taking too much of my time. I'm letting it, rule my life, and I'm ready to stop. What would you do if someone says it's time for me to fix modern idolatry?
well, and that's why I brought up. I wanted to kind of set up the idea that those desires. The Bible talks about, it uses a fancy word, concupiscence.
Yeah.
But these are evil desires.
Spell that way.
I can't. But these are what we covet. We lust. These are evil desires. Directly connected then to that idea of covetousness, Paul says is idolatry. Colossians 3 and verse 5. Knowing that up front, if I want to make a change in that, if I want to repent, I want to turn away from those things, turn away from idols unto the living God, in other words, as Paul preached, then I'm going to have to set things in front of me. I'm going to have to, so we could go to Colossians, and we could, how Paul actually talks about it. If we are raised with Christ, Colossians chapter 3, before he talks about covetousness, which is idolatry. If you're raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things of the earth. You died, your life is hidden with Christ, and when Christ, who is our life, that has to be that change. And there is, both in the Ephesian letter and the Colossians letter, there's this conversation about the old man has to be put to death, and his deeds, his actions, his life, the way he's living, and you have to put on the new man. The new man is renewed in Christ. The new man is different. His affections are different. His mind is thinking differently. He's thinking on things above. That's where he set his affection, his love, what he has set as first in his life. He is done. You're died. Your life is hidden with Christ now in God, and so we want to appear with him in glory. Verse 4, and therefore put to death your members which are on the earth: fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desires, covetousness, which is idolatry. Notice the connection of all three of those things: fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, covetousness. Guess what they are all associated with, especially in pagan worship and idolatry? They're all a part of those scenes. What had Israel seen in Egypt? And when Moses goes up on the mount to receive the law, and the children of Israel are there waiting, and okay, well, Aaron, let's make an idol. Let's gather all the gold. What are we going to do? That's what they had seen previously. And not only then was their worship of that idol, but the things they were doing by way of acts of worship were the things that they had seen in Egypt, which were associated. Guess what they were? They were unclean. They were evil desires. They were things that the children of God would never should have been associated with.
Yeah.
And so if you study the practices of Egyptian worship, those things would be very clear. They're unclean, they're evil, and so forth. They are involved. Fornication was part of that as well. And so when Malachi talks about how they dealt treacherously with the wives of their youth, I think there's a reference to even their idol practices of worship, because that was what was typically associated with such. And why, when you get into the New Testament and Paul is dealing with great is Diana of the Ephesians, and sitting in Corinth and looking, or sitting in Athens and looking around and noticing all the idol worship and the things that were associated with that, and why in his letters he's having to deal with sexual immorality over and over. That seems to be part of that conversation. If I'm going to then change from modern idolatry, these things that are really associated even with Gnosticism, modern day Gnosticism, this make-believe knowledge, this fantasy life, fantasy world. John ends his letters, keep yourself from idols. It wasn't just a first century thing. And so you're going to have to guard yourself from these things. And so even a self-fabricated religion would be considered idolatry. And so if I'm going to do that, then I'm going to have to turn from idols to the living God. In other words, there's repentance that's involved.
And at what point do we realize my identity can't be my idol, what I'm based around? I can't spend my entire life building myself and my identity and self-image up and letting other things fall by the wayside. The money that I have in a bank account cannot become my idol, though I certainly would like to have as much of it as needed to be able to provide for my family and to do the things that we need to do. The dollar cannot be what I serve and cannot be what I'm constantly looking into and trying to figure out, how can I get more of this? Right. And I'll do it whatever the cost. Entertainment cannot be my idol, though it certainly has its place, and certainly I'm thankful that we live in a time where it's easier to find some of the shows. I mean, I remember growing up and watching Full House, and we missed the episode because we had been in trouble, and we didn't get to watch the episode that Tuesday or whatever night they were airing it, and we were devastated because it meant that we had to wait months to watch that episode because they didn't just re-air them all the time, and if they did re-air them, we were asleep when they were re-airing them, so we had to catch it at just the right time with just the right moment. And now, if I want to do that, I can hold up the little Apple remote that I've got and say, show me the episodes of Full House, and it will take me to wherever I can go to get them right at the push of a button. And certainly there are benefits to that. Yeah. There's also detriments to it. As difficult as it can be to continue talking about this subject in some ways, sexual activity cannot become an idol. Mm-hmm. And certainly we've already talked about some sinful idols that are involved in that, with adultery, pornography, other types of things that can go along with that. But even the idea of just being engaged in that activity cannot be my entire life. Right. I have to have a balance in my life. Being comforted by different things cannot become an idol. Our phones cannot become an idol. And if you know you've got an idol, then knock it out and get rid of it. And there's a way to do that. And I think what you said earlier, which is amazing to see how this happened in the Old Testament, kind of like we sometimes see in our day and age today when a president gets in They always talk about the first 100 days.
Right.
As if no other days matter in the presidency. But those first 100 are super duper important. And people always talk about what are they doing in their first 100 days? What's their plan?
Right.
Well, what they usually talk about trying to accomplish in the first 100 days is if they're being elected into the same exact, party is being reelected, or as it may be, maybe the president served 2 terms and another president is being elected that's from the same, political party. They're going to want to continue doing what they've been doing, more than likely. But as the case has also been, if a president is coming in that's saying, I don't like what the other party was doing, they're going to spend as much of their first 100 days trying to undo whatever it is they can undo. The kings did that.
Right.
The king showed up and said, hey, this trash of these high places being built and all this kind of stuff, we're getting rid of that. This doesn't have a place here. And as you mentioned, unfortunately, sometimes the king said, hey, we're bringing them back, man. We're going to do what we can to promote this sinful activity.
Bringing this trash back.
That's right. Bring it back. We love it. And I look at that and think about the idolatrous practices that existed and how religious leaders, today are trying as hard as they can to tell people idolatry is wrong. Idolatry is wrong. The kings did that too. The kings were so desired to tell people, knock it out, get rid of it. And instead of having a make trash great again mentality, we need to realize that trash is still trash and it doesn't have any place. When the trash overflows, take it out.
Yeah.
And certainly idolatry causes it to overflow. You got anything else you want to say?
Your use of the word trash amazes me.
It's trash, man.
It's trash. I would say just real brief. And we're, again, just to reiterate, we're not saying, obviously, sports
Right.
and entertainment, those things have a place, and we're appreciative of those, to have a little respite, from work and to be able to enjoy, some of those things, but they can't be our life.
Right.
And that's and so it's unfortunate sometimes that even parents will push their children in such a way that the children grow up thinking,
yeah,
this is life. Right?
This is all is life, right? That's
all
the
is life,
old
yeah.
phrase that's been rearing its ugly head more and more.
Right. And
Yeah.
So, but it is not. God is
what
life.
it is? It's trash.
Yeah. No doubt.
And I don't mean that to be, disrespectful. I certainly want to make sure people understand, but the old adage, garbage in, garbage out,
Yeah.
is what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
If I fill my life with things that don't benefit me, it's no different than the way that people say going and eating trash and eating garbage. And no one wants to do that. If you've ever had this happen, where someone takes something, little children do this a lot, and they'll just throw it away. We had a situation a couple months ago where my daughter threw away some of our bowls, and we had to go in the trash and dig them out. Well, you got to figure that out because they don't belong there.
Right.
But what belongs in the trash needs to be in the trash. Yeah. Thanks, Wayne.
Yep.
Now, this is the new version of What Would You Do If, and we say the word trash a lot now. We're appreciative of the opportunity that we had to be with you in discussing the Bible and modern idolatry, and certainly the things that are keeping us from the Lord do need to be thrown away from our lives. I hope and pray that this has been a blessing to you. We're a part of the Scattered Abroad Network, recording here in the Memphis School of Preaching studios, and next week we look forward to having another opportunity to give you a Bible answer to everyday questions. Cut.